My name is Jessica Velez, and this is my oral designer presentation on Charles Frederick Worth. Charles Frederick Worth became the first ever fashion designer and is known throughout history as the father of haute couture. Worth was born on the 13th of October in 1825 in Lincolnshire. His father was a heavy drinker where he drank and gambled the Worth family into poverty. His family all had to find work, and young Charles, at age 11, never received a proper education. This setback is what has made Worth a natural hard worker and later devoted his every waking life to not only making elegant dresses for the imperials of his time, but by being the first dressmaker to tell royalty what to put on their body, thus making Worth the first fashion designer in history. As fate would have it, Worth's mother found him an apprenticeship at a drapery known as Swan and Edgar. It was at Swan and Edgar where Worth had learned all about fabrics, which later became the essential process of his dressmaking in the future. He learned which fabrics worked the best against the human body and which were used in certain styles. Although he was becoming increasingly familiar into the art of dressmaking, he wasn't truly inspired until he took a trip to the new National Gallery while on errand for Swan and Edgar. Once there, he witnessed extraordinary dresses and paintings worn by previous royalty. He then understood that fashion was developed from those times and was certain he wanted to be a part of that world. Worth's apprenticeship was over when he was at the age of 25 in 1945, and he was certain he must leave to the capital of fashion, Paris, France. Without knowing a bit of the French language and with only £5 in his pocket, Worth had arrived in Paris. It was a year until he spoke the language and then landed his first job in fashion at the prestigious Gaggelin, where he not only became the leading salesman, but also developed and ran the dressmaking department. It was there that Worth met his future wife, Mary Vernet, who he later used as a model for his designs. Worth had the great achievement of having one of his designs worn by the Empress Eugenie in the famous painting by Franz Xaver Winterhalter, where she is surrounded by her ladies-in-waiting. The dress is one of Worth's most distinguishable dresses of today. The dress is described in The Age of Worth as a light, graceful summer dress of gauze over white silk trimmed with bows of blue ribbon. It was a significant indication for the coming success for Worth, but he had not yet made a grandeur name for himself, as the Empress had not personally ordered the dress from him and was yet to know his name. Even though Worth worked incredibly hard in his department and never missed an opportunity to capitalize in the world of fashion in Paris, it was his wife that provided him with his breakthrough. Having once seen the Princess Pauline de Metternich during a late-night stroll, she had fiercely decided to show the princess her husband's designs, and so she did. Having walked to the Austrian embassy and requested to see the princess, the outcome couldn't have been better. The princess saw the designs as ravishing and ordered 2 dresses and promised to wear one to the next ball. The princess had kept her promise and wore it to the following ball at the Palace of the Tuileries. She described the dress as nothing less than a masterpiece, as it was made of white tulle and silver lame, and trimmed with the marguerites and with a belt of white satin. The Empress was close to the princess and had taken a liking to her dress by asking where she had purchased it, to which the princess gave the name of Worth. The Empress requested that Worth come to her rooms the following morning. The rest is imperial haute couture fashion history, as the Empress was delighted with the designs he created for her, to which she recommended him to her mother and ladies-in-waiting. Of course, this success also brought upon customers who followed the fashions of the Empress. Having long left his post at Gaggelin, Worth teamed up with a partner by the name of Gustav Berberg, who was also in the drapery trade, and opened their own shop entitled Worth et Berberg. There he created dresses of elegant simplicity of which he was a master. His customers varied from around the globe, but only of those who could afford his expensive designs. Amongst his customers were Empress Eugenie, Princess Pauline de Metternich, opera star Adelina Patti, and Edward VIII's mistress, Miss Capel, among many others. An interesting customer who wore his designs was the prostitute Cora Pearl, who purchased an ivy-trimmed evening dress and ermine cloak to show off lavishness and to prove she could afford the same clothes as the Empress. Worth also made a beautifully intricate lilac silk dress covered in clouds of tulle in the same shade in which clusters of lilies of the valley were to be drowned. to be worn with a veil of white tulle to create a mist over the mauve clouds of flowers, and lastly, a sash of flowing ends to suggest the reins of a Venus chariot, as described in The Age of Worth. He made this dress in one day for Madame Octave Feuillet, the wife of a famous novelist. She described the dress as a bouquet. One could point out a design of Worth's by looking at the silhouettes. In his early designs, the neckline was low and heavily embellished at the top with a corset-shaped waistline and daube-like bottom made from the crinoline. Later, he played with the crinoline and started to design dresses with flat-fronted crinolines that pushed the fullness to the back. Royalty sisters Princess Alexandra of Wales and the Empress of Russia were great examples of that exact design. Throughout Worth's career, he was responsible for many innovative creations that were either significant to the fashion of his time or still referred to in modern times. For example, having long detested the bonnet, Worth had made an alternative that was called a bavolet, essentially a bonnet without the usual flap in the back. Worth was the first designer to make changes to height of the crinoline. Before then, the bell-shaped crinoline was a phenomenon in women's dresses that fashion papers reported it indispensable, even though Worth eventually grew to hate it and worked hard for decades to rule it out of fashion altogether. Although he couldn't decrease the popularity of the crinoline, eventually he invented new ways to wear it. He was the first to create summer dresses that had shorter crinolines, exposing a woman's ankles. An important innovation to note is the word mannequin, which was derived from a journalist trying to describe Worth's showroom. Worth was also the first designer to use live models in his showroom for customers to see his designs. He even made a shade of brown that became exceedingly popular, so much that women were even dyeing their hair to achieve it. The brown was named Bismarck Brown after a man who loathed fashion. Worth's designs are particularly accredited to the people he was making them for, as he would find inspiration from the woman requesting a design. One of his most interesting forms of inspiration is from a poor woman who tied the layers of her dress to keep the dust from hitting her dress as she swept. He then created what is called the overskirt. Other forms of inspiration came from the Louvre, a museum in France. Sometimes the Princesse de Metternich would suggest different ways to reshape the crinoline, and he followed suit. During the French and Prussian War, Worth and Burberg had to close their shop located at 7 Rue de la Paix, which had become increasingly popular from their business. The shop was eventually reopened, this time without Burberg. It was now called the House of Worth, and Worth employed his two sons, Jean-Philippe and Gaston Worth, to continue making his designs until Worth died in 1895. Afterwards, his son continued to run his design house for many years. The location of 7 Rue de la Paix, according to the Omega website, is now facilitated by Omega. Worth paved the way through innovative fashion ideas for all the designers who had followed behind him. Even designers of today use his ideas he created, like the use of mannequins and models. As mentioned before, he was the first dressmaker to dictate what the imperials of his time were to wear, which is a practice known as high fashion today. He was a true artist that expanded the image that Paris, France was the capital of couture and is rightly recognized as the father of haute couture.